May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be pleasing and acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and Redeemer. Amen. You may be seated. I don't know about you all, but these days I feel as if I'm a stranger, a foreigner on this earth. Do you feel that way too? When we look out across the world and our nation and our communities, and we see continuing divisions around economics and race, as we continue to see violence perpetuated to lift up the few and to put money in the pockets of just an even fewer, it feels as if we are strangers and foreigners in this world, that we do not understand it and the world doesn't understand us. This is not the first time, though, for us to feel this. In fact, every generation of the faithful have had experiences just like this that we are undergoing now, wrestling with similar questions. How do we live as followers of Jesus, as God's people, in a world that seems so foreign to God's way of life? We hear it echoed generation after generation, and we see it lifted up for us this morning in our epistle to the Hebrews. We hear how even then, in the beginning stages of the church, the first followers of Jesus felt like strangers and foreigners in this world. And so what do we do with that? What does it mean for us to be strangers and foreigners? How do we move through that? Our epistle reading helps us understand how. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, a conviction of things unseen. I love this particular verse because it points us to what carries us through, not just in the moment, but across our entire life and across many lives and generations. It is our faith in God and God's teachings in the world that God has promised us, even if we don't see it fulfilled fully in front of us. We persist in our faith, assured in the conviction of things not yet seen, but we know will. Just as many ancestors who came before us, who only saw that future off in the distance and continued to persist in moving towards God and living out a life of faith centered in love and compassion and grace. We are given the example of Abraham today. It's just one example from this particular passage. You may have noticed in your bulletin that there's a segment where we jump from one part of Hebrews to another segment. There's a chunk missing. They just cut out a bunch of examples for us. They give us examples of Abraham and Sarah, which we read this morning. It also gives us the example of Moses. It gives us the example of nameless people of faith who walked before. Here we know the story of Abraham. Or at the beginning of his story rather, Abram and Sarai are called by God to leave their community, the land, the nation they know, and to go off into the wilderness, to be led to some far-off place that they don't know where it's at. Oh, and God is going to give them children, and so many children that they will be more numerous than the stars in heaven or the grains of sand on the shore. And so Abraham and Sarah, they go. And they journey and they follow God, and they wait. They wait, and years pass. So many years pass that it's long past childbearing years, and yet God still promises you will be given a child, and your children and your descendants will be more numerous than the stars. And Abraham persists in his faith, not understanding how it will come about, but trusting that because God promised it would be so, that it will be. The result of his faithfulness and Sarah's faithfulness is the birth of a child that goes on to give birth to the people of Israel. We see how for Abraham and Sarah, they did not get to live to see the fullness of that promise. They greeted it from a distance, but though the fulfillment of it was in the distance, they knew a fulfillment of it already in their life, in that moment, in the community of people that God called together to live a different way, to sow seeds that will change the world. I think we can point to many examples of this throughout our history, of those who felt that they were foreigners and strangers and yet continued to persist for the hope and the longing for a better homeland, a world that is better than what we know now. Over the course of my pilgrimage travels, I learned of a woman named Harriet Jacobs. Is that name familiar to any folks here? Harriet Jacobs? Okay, it's good to know. I like that I can introduce new things to you every once in a while. Harriet Jacobs was an enslaved person in the late 1700s and the early 1800s in Edenton, North Carolina, where I went and made pilgrimage. She's most famous for the memoir that she wrote once she escaped enslavement, Notes of a Slave Girl. And in that book, she talks about her real-life experience being enslaved by a well-to-do doctor in the town of Edenton. Now, this doctor had a thing for Harriet and continued to pursue her in ways that she certainly did not want to be pursued, in addition to the indignity and the injustice of being enslaved. And this man, this enslaver, had a vicious temper and anger about him, so much so that he used her own children and her siblings, her extended family, as threats against her if she did not give him what he wanted. I cannot help but think that she felt a stranger and a foreigner in her own life. And yet, where she could have fallen into dismay and just fallen in and accepted the world as it was, there is a hope within her, an understanding that there is something better than this for the world. I ponder how the words of the gospel that she would have heard around town and experienced in her grandmother's home, who was a free person of color who owned property, mind you. That's a feat in its day and time. How it inspired hope and a longing for a better homeland for herself and for her children. And so she did something courageous. She fled enslavement. And for over 12 years, she hid around the town of Edenton, initially in people's homes and in places that she could find, but ultimately hiding in an attic loft in her grandmother's home. And when we say an attic loft, it's not the fancy refurbished attics that we have today if we have the money to do it. The space was just large enough for her to lay down in. That was it. She couldn't sit up. She couldn't stand. She laid in that attic loft for over 10 years. As she heard the voice of the enslaver she escaped walking down the street, as she heard and watched her children grow up, but they not being aware that she was present. Harriet eventually does escape enslavement in Eden through the Maritime Underground Railroad. People assisted her so she could escape off into a swamp and be whisked out in the cover of night to be brought to the north, where she writes down her story and publishes it encouraging people of goodwill and of good faith to fight against the injustice of the system of slavery. Now, she might not have lived to see the fullness of God's reign brought forward, but she experienced the kingdom and the reign of God in her life as she worked with God to seek that better homeland. And what she did experience, that glimmering just off in the distance, was that she was able to get her children out of enslavement too, and into a place where they could live free. I feel that each generation, sometimes multiple generations, we have big things that feel that we cannot overcome them, and yet our faith, Jesus shows us, God shows us that with God's ability with us and within us, all things are conquerable. All things that are evil will be brought down, and all that is good will be raised up. And so what does this mean for us today? When we ask ourselves, how do we deal with being strangers and foreigners in this world, we take our hope and our strength from the generations who have come before us. Those who laid the seeds and nurtured the faith in their children and their grandchildren, so that while this greater work of God is being done, we can become partakers in that, instruments of seeing that revealed, of spreading it, of building God's kingdom. We may not live in our life. We may not end, or our life may not end with the fulfillment of that promise in the way that we hope for. But we persist in it anyway through faith, convicted that what we don't see today will one day be seen. That one day we will not divide families up because they are considered illegal. That there will be no hunger in the world because we each feed one another. So what does our act of faith and our life of faith look like right now? We each have been given different work to do. We have different vocations and skills. And God invites us to intentionally discern how we are making that better homeland known today. To be that countercultural current in the world that is sowing seeds, being yeast in this world, so that it changes and transforms. This could look like a lot of different ways. I think how yesterday, as I was preparing the sermon, I watched out of my window as a young family were getting their newborn infant into the car. And one of the parents was holding the child while the other parent was getting the seat ready. And y'all remember yesterday, it was hot, it was sunny, it was late afternoon. And I watched as this parent take this fussy newborn and just step 2 or 3 steps into our yard to stand under the shade of the oak tree that we planted there when we moved. That oak tree I have grown from an acorn. And I know that I'll never get to see it in its fullness. I will never get to see the full power and weight and impact it will have in this world, but yesterday I caught just a glimpse. How something planted in faith could change someone else's day, change someone else's experience of life. I think about a story that I heard this past week where one of our parishioners was celebrating a birthday, and when people asked her, well, what can we give you to celebrate your birthday? What do you want? She didn't ask for anything for herself, but asked rather for people to donate food to the food pantry. Invited them to give of that abundance to someone else who had more need of it. That little seed that was sown, what might grow from that for her and for the people who said yes to the invitation. So when we think about how we journey in this life, how we deal with being strangers in a foreign time and place, We are invited to have faith, to remember that we are working towards something that is not fully seen, but will be, that we see the glimmers and glimpses of, that we recognize and experience the fullness of within each other, that we are building something better, a better homeland for us all. And that might be discouraging at times. It might feel as if God's taken a long time to get that work done with us. But hear the words of Jesus in the gospel. We do not know the day or the time that God's work will be completed, so do not be caught unawares. Don't let this world dishearten you and push you down. Persist in loving and caring and following in the teachings of Jesus. Be prepared, for we are a part of the kingdom, and that kingdom will be made known. The unseen will be seen, and the reign of God will be among us one day. Amen. I invite you to please stand as you